Did you know that spring is less than 8 weeks away? So even though it is still cold and dreary outside, let's get in the spirit by creating some fun and easy spring projects. In today's video, I'll be sharing 15 of my favorite spring DIYs using easy to find thrift store items and simple materials from around the house. So if you're ready to add a touch of spring to your home, let's get started.
Okay, this first project is super easy. I took an old paint can that I had purchased at a garage sale full of nails and I gave it a good cleaning. I took a faucet that I had purchased at a thrift store and gave it a good cleaning as well. And then I mixed up some 2-part epoxy, applied it to the back of the faucet, and attached the faucet to the can. It cures in 4 to 6 hours, and then you have a really super cute planter. I had thought about putting a real plant in it, but decided just to stage it with some faux plants and let the new owner do whatever they wanted with it.
I think this thrifted rabbit was someone else's failed DIY. I spray painted it blue and then applied white wax using a wax brush to get into all of the crevices. I followed up with a rag to wipe off the excess wax. Although I was happy with the way that it looked, I had been wanting to try something different. I had a fuzzy Swiffer-like mop head that I purchased at Dollar Tree, which I cut down to make smaller. Just a little warning, this step was really messy, but once I got it trimmed down to the size that I wanted, I wrapped it around the bunny like a fur stole, and then I finished it off with a thrift store brooch. For the next project, I purchased some ceramic butterflies at the thrift store for a couple dollars. I cleaned them really well and then I spray painted them white to cover up the flower design. To change up the appearance of the butterflies, I decided to decoupage them with a botanical print napkin. First, tear apart the plies of the napkin so that you are just working with the printed top ply. I applied a thin coat of Mod Podge to the butterflies and then carefully applied small pieces of the napkin to create a pattern that I liked. I applied napkin to the front of all the butterflies first and let them dry, and then I flipped them over and applied napkin to the back side of all the butterflies. When they were completely dry, I sprayed them with a clear top coat. And finally, I used some E6000 glue to attach small clips to the back of each butterfly. For the next project, I used jars that a friend gave me that were left over from a wedding. I have a large stash of angel hair vine that I bought for a couple dollars at a thrift store, but you can find it at most craft stores, and I have it linked in my Amazon store. I cut apart a Dollar Tree floral bush and added it to the jar, and finally I tied a bow around the top of the jar with some jute twine. I estimate that this jar only cost me about $3 to make. I made a second floral jar using the angel hair vine to create a small bird's nest to attach to the front of the jar. I shaped it into a circle and then used florist wire to hold it in place. The vine is very stiff and breaks pretty easily. Since I wasn't able to twist it as tightly as I wanted to, I hot glued some sheet moss inside the circle to create a bottom for the nest. I also hot glued a couple of small bird eggs into the nest. To make sure that the nest didn't fall off of the jar, I wired a pussy willow stem to the back of it and then pushed the stem down into the jar.
I wanted the nest to lean forward a little, and so I did hot glue it to the front of the jar. And finally, I added a twine bow. Because I used floral scraps to make this jar, it cost me almost nothing. I used some Dollar Tree pressed wood blocks for this next project. The paper labels were really glued on there, so I had to sand them off. Then I painted them in various shades of Waverly chalk paint. I printed out 4 vintage spring images on regular copy paper. I'll have the images I used linked in my description box. Because paper doesn't adhere to wood as easily as it does smooth surfaces, I applied Mod Podge both to the back of the image and to the wood block itself. I used a clean towel to help me smooth out any wrinkles. I always print out my images a little bigger than I need to make sure that they fit properly. And then I cut off the excess paper using a utility knife and then go around the edges with some 220 grit sandpaper. I also distressed the block itself and then used clear wax to seal the chalk paint. And to seal the paper image, I sprayed on 3 light coats of a clear top coat. This is such an easy and inexpensive way to add a little vintage art to your spring vignettes. To make a small trivet tray, I used a thrift store metal leaf and a ceramic bird. I spray painted them both with a dark metallic spray paint and then used E6000 glue to attach the bird to the leaf. I let the glue dry overnight. The next day, I brushed on some agave blue chalk paint and then lightly rubbed it off. I kept repeating this process until I got a look that I liked. This was a simple project that I think ended up looking very high-end. I purchased this thrift store tray for $2.99 and sanded over the Uncle Sam image to get a smooth finish. I painted it first with a white primer and then with 2 coats of Waverly's mineral chalk paint. Next, I separated the top layer from a 3-ply napkin. Luckily, the napkin was large enough to cover the tray in just one piece. I brushed the entire base of the tray with a thin coat of Mod Podge, then carefully applied the napkin, smoothing out wrinkles as I went. When the glue was completely dry, I came back with a utility knife and cut off the excess napkin. And because some of the napkin was glued onto the sides of the tray, I had to use a little sandpaper to get it all off. So I just touched up those areas with some more of the chalk paint. When everything was dry, I used 3 light coats of a clear top coat to seal and protect the napkin. To create a small spring planter, I pulled out a bread pan and 2 lamp harps from my stash. To start, I removed all the extra pieces from the lamp harps. Then, using a drill bit about the same diameter as the lamp harp, I drilled holes in the 4 corners of the baking pan. You want a snug fit, so don't make the holes too large. Insert the legs of your harps through the holes and use a ruler to adjust the height of each leg. Fill in around all 4 holes with hot glue to make sure that the legs stay put. If you want a sleek, modern look, you could spray paint your pan, but I wanted a more rustic look, so I painted mine with green chalk paint, and when the paint was dry, I distressed it with some fine grit sandpaper, and to protect the paint, I applied a coat of clear wax. To fill my planter, I spray painted 4 tin cans with white spray paint and printed out some vintage shaker labels, which I cut out and decoupaged to the side of each can. You could put live plants in your cans, but I filled each can with packing styrofoam and topped it off with coffee. Then I added inexpensive greenery stems to the styrofoam. I also think this planter would look great without the cans and just putting dirt and live plants directly into the pan. Although this thrift store watering can is already pretty cute, I thought we could do better. First, I painted over the floral pattern and the white portion of the watering can with chiffon cream chalk paint. Then I separated a 2-ply napkin, setting aside the pattern portion for later. I ironed the plain white back piece of napkin to remove any wrinkles. Then I taped it to a piece of cardstock and ran it through my inkjet printer, printing out a Peter Rabbit image that I created in Canva. I did this process a second time, creating another image for the back of the watering can. My printer creates black ink splotches any place there's a wrinkle in the paper, which is why I ironed it first. I decided to cut out the individual images rather than try to apply the entire piece of napkin all at once, which was more likely to wrinkle. I brushed on a thin, even coat of Mod Podge to the watering can and then began carefully applying the napkin images, smoothing out any wrinkles with my fingers. I just applied the small images wherever I thought they would look good. Once the image was adhered to the can, I carefully went over them with a top coat of Mod Podge. I rescued this not-so-cute ceramic rabbit from the thrift store. To begin, I gave him a couple coats of white spray paint. Then I began cutting out the images from the pattern portion of the napkin left over from my previous project. For a better appearance, I cut very close to the image, cutting away most of the plain napkin. Then, like I had done on the watering can, I applied Mod Podge to a small section of the rabbit and then carefully applied one of the cutout images. Once it was adhered, I went over it with a top coat of Mod Podge. I thought about putting a small bird's nest inside the egg, but instead I used a piece of styrofoam and then added some greenery and flowers and Spanish moss. I felt the plants made the rabbit less Easter specific so that it could be left out all spring long. I think the key to this transformation was decoupaging images to the rabbit's face, which helped to camouflage his cartoonish expression. For this next project, I picked up a couple inexpensive ceramic bunnies at the Target dollar spot and sprayed them with some oil-rubbed bronze spray paint. I also picked up this furniture leg at the Habitat Restore for just $1. I used my miter saw to cut 2 slices from the rounded lower leg section and then sanded them down to the bare wood using my orbital sander. I applied some Dollar Tree wood stain to the 2 wood pieces. I just wiped it on and then wiped off the excess. I let it dry overnight, and the next day I came back and glued the bunnies to the pieces of wood using E6000 glue. I'm really surprised at how much I like how these rabbits turned out. I love the contrast of the raw wood with the metallic appearance of the rabbits. If you've seen very many of my videos, then you know I have a fascination with old lamps. So when I saw this metal hummingbird wall art, I wanted to try merging it with an old lamp that I had in my stash. I cleaned both really well and then painted them with a couple coats of metallic gold spray paint. Once the paint was fully dry, I drilled a small hole in the base of the lamp on the opposite side away from the cord. Then I applied E6000 glue in the hole and to the end piece of the metal wall decor. I pushed the end piece into the hole and began rearranging the metal branches, both for appearance and to help
the branches stay firmly in place. This was such an inexpensive and easy way to turn a very plain lamp into something really special for spring. For this next project, I decided to see what I could do with this old mirror that had been in my stash for quite a while. It had 2 hooks on the bottom, one of which was broken, so I removed them both. Then I bent up the staples on the back and removed the piece of cardboard and the mirror. I wasn't going to be putting the hooks back on the frame, so I filled the holes with some wood fill. When the filler was dry, I sanded it smooth and then painted the frame with a couple coats of ivory chalk paint. When the paint was dry, I lightly distressed the edges of the mirror with 220 grit sandpaper and then applied Valspar antiquing glaze, which has a gray tone as compared to the antiquing wax by Waverly, which has a brown tone. I wanted to remove some of the mirror backing, so I applied some paint stripper in one spot on the back and let it sit for 30 minutes. But when I tried to scrape off the backing, nothing happened. So I tried using my orbital sander, and it worked like a charm. I had an IOD transfer that had accidentally gotten stuck to a piece of the cardboard packaging, so I decided to use it behind the mirror. I added a few additional transfers to fill in some of the empty spots, and then I attached the IOD transfer to the cardboard backing using glue stick. I put the mirror and cardboard backing back into the frame and then folded down the staples to hold everything in place. To add extra stability and to clean up the back of the mirror, I applied some brown paper tape around the edges, covering up all of the staples. Then I marked the center along the top back and attached a sawtooth hanger. And as a final touch, I applied one small floral IOD transfer to the corner of the mirror frame. I used floral images for spring, but I also think using some vintage photographs would create a really interesting effect. I acquired a broken table at a garage sale for free and decided to use its separate parts in projects rather than trying to put it back together. I cut a scrap piece of wood to the width of one of the decorative table pieces and then cut the decorative piece into 2 separate pieces. I painted them with 2 coats of Rust-Oleum Chiffon Cream chalk paint, and I stained the scrap piece of wood by rubbing a light coat of Waverly antiquing wax on it. Then I sandwiched the stained piece of wood between the 2 cut pieces of the decorative board and glued them all together using a combination of construction adhesive and wood glue. I clamped it together and let it dry overnight. The next day, I lightly distressed it with sandpaper and applied a coat of clear wax to the entire piece. Finally, I attached a sawtooth hanger to the back and the hook that I had removed from the mirror to the top of the decorative piece so that I could hang a small wreath there. Obviously, this shelf could be decorated for any season, but I think it looks especially sweet with spring decor. Most of us have seen lots of ideas for turning old books into shelf decor, but this idea is a little different and doesn't require painting the books. I thrifted 5 books by the same author because they were all exactly the same size, but had different colored spines. After I removed the dust jackets, I used Goof Off to remove the printing along the spine of each book. To decorate the books, I chose a floral IOD transfer that would allow the color of the spines to show through. I lined up the transfer on the book bundle, and then I cut the image into separate strips to fit on each of the 5 books. I used the tool that comes with the IOD transfer package to rub the transfer onto the book spines, and then I carefully removed the backing. I also added some typography from the transfer to fill in some empty space on the white book. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and thank you so very much for watching. I truly appreciate every one of you.